Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. North Korea on Tuesday fired a ballistic missile over Japan, forcing the country to issue evacuation notices, also suspend trains during the flight of the nuclear-capable weapon. The launch is being seen as the most provocative weapons demonstration by North Korea this year as it ramps up missile tests. The intermediate-range missile traveled about 4,500 kilometers, the longest distance ever traveled by a North Korean missile, before falling into the Pacific Ocean, far enough to hit the US island of Guam if it took another trajectory. Now, Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida described the launch as violent behavior, while Defense Minister Yasukazu Hamada said Japan would not rule out any options to strengthen its defenses, including counterattack capabilities. Tokyo describes North Korea's series of actions, including its repeated ballistic missile launches, as a threat to not just the peace and security of Japan and the region, but a serious challenge to the entire international community. So what has prompted North Korea to fire over or past Japan in recent days? A move that's seen as a significant escalation in tensions in the region. We'll try and understand from experts who are joining us on the program. Pleased to welcome with me in the studio Mr. Sandeep Kumar Mishra, Associate Professor, Center for East Asian Studies, JNU. Professor, thank you for your time. Welcome to Sansad TV.
Thank you.
And joining us virtually is Mr. Harshvi Pant, Vice President, Studies and Foreign Policy, ORF, and former Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri. Thank you to both guests for joining us virtually on the program as well. Mr. Mishra, let me begin the program today with you. For the benefit of our viewers, let's first try and understand what has triggered the current round of escalation because of which North Korea fired a missile over Japan, and it's considered to be, it's been described as a significant escalation in the last 5 years. It's the first such instance.
I think it's difficult to decipher North Korean mind. In the beginning, I should admit it. But I think overall, it's basically overall many things which have been happening in last few weeks. Especially in September, there have been several, at least three, I can tell you, three joint military exercises happening between Japan, South Korea, and United States. One happened in Hawaii, then another happened in, you can say, between like US and South Korea in August. And then another one, 30th of September, they had one trilateral you can say, submarine exercise in the Sea of Japan or East Sea, whatever you want to say. So I think all these things were there. They could be probably the immediate reason. But overall, it seems to me that North Korea is basically trying to say that, look, if you escalate, if you put more pressure on North Korea, that's not going to that's not going to be productive for your policy goals. And that's why they want to show it that rather than basically putting pressure on North Korea, all these parties, they must try to think about having some kind of start a channel of dialogue with North Korea. So probably that's the reason which I can see. Otherwise, I think there's no immediate, I think.
Okay, so yeah. The current escalation perhaps is because of the combined exercises between these three countries. Professor, what is your assessment? The last time the combined exercises took place in 2017, North Korea fired 2 missiles over Japan in response. A week later, it conducted a nuclear test. Now, this time as well, South Korea claims North Korea may conduct a nuclear test after the end of the Congress in China and just ahead of the midterm elections in the United States. Are there indications of another round of nuclear test by North Korea?
Well, I certainly think that what they have been doing over the last few weeks and months is to gradually make a case that that they have a deterrence posture in existence, including the nuclear warheads and the missiles. And ultimately, it's a question of nuclear deterrence rests on credibility, and they want to make sure that their credibility is seen by the world, their arsenal is seen by the world as credible. So I think, you see the increasing sophistication of these exercises, you see increasing sophistication of the missile weaponry, and there is a sense that perhaps the North Koreans are indeed making a statement to the world. I mean, see, there is also this thing about North Korea that, if America in particular is not paying them a lot of attention, then they tend to get attention hungry. So they also make these noises. They also make it, they also make a case that, look, we also exist. Give us your due attention. put us on the diplomatic radar, and then we will see what can be accomplished. So I think they are sending multiple messages through these exercises, but there is no doubt that there has been a gradual building up of nuclear and missile inventory. There is a sense, and I think we have seen those reports coming not only from South Korea, but from other intelligence services as well, that North Koreans are getting ready for a nuclear test. And I think by and large, those are noise-making exercises where they want to drum up support, and world is consumed by multiple crises, and no one is paying North Korea any attention. So I think they do want that attention to some degree, and these are attempts not only to make those noises but also to demonstrate, as I think Sandeep was saying earlier, that in response to immediate exercises, that they do retain a deterrent in place whose credibility should not be questioned.
Ambassador, you seem to agree with this attention-seeking exercise by North Korea. Historically, also, it's been seen that they create a crisis perhaps to get the attention from America. And now that the Joe Biden administration looks to be preoccupied with the Ukraine crisis, do you also agree that this is an attention-seeking exercise by Kim Jong-un?
Tina, is that addressed to me?
Yes, yes, Ambassador.
Yeah. Look, I think the two professors have said it very well. One, that they want to demonstrate their abilities and their capabilities with credibility. And there's a playbook in place. When you do certain things, they do certain. Secondly, as Professor Harshpant has very rightly pointed out, they are a little bit interested in seeking a space for themselves in the radar screen. And so certainly they must be feeling that all the attention is somewhere else. But, let me leave with you a bit of a counter thought, because with the North Koreans, you never know what is it exactly that prompts them. Would you agree that by their ratcheting up this kind of nuclear business in the Far East, in some senses, they are dragging the United States into two-pronged set of actions? There is a similar kind of, let me say at the moment, I would like to believe hopefully more hype than in terms of realities, something happening in the continent of Europe. We are talking about Russian so-called alleged threats for the use of nuclear weapons, etc., in the areas around Ukraine. Now, this is one side of the story. Has somebody sort of given them a little bit of a push? Just do it and let's see what happens. I don't know. I am simply throwing this out here because, frankly, not many people around have credible information of what they are doing. Their playbooks are kind of known. They've done it in the past, and that certainly would be something that, gets them to go. But do remember that the North Korean leader is not only about nuclear deterrence, etc. It's also about retaining leadership of himself, his family, etc. And the country needs something or the other, given poverty, given several other factors. They need to be kept distracted. So there is this constant domestic element that, I am there, you are there, and we are something in the world and something to be proud about. The rest of the world knows that things are quite difficult in North Korea.
Certainly. Professor Mishra, the fact that it's a country which is in a relatively impoverished state comparatively. It's the country with the most, difficult sanctions in place from different countries, from United States as well. To thrive, it needs these sanctions to be lifted. Instead of working towards that, instead of moving towards a dialogue, it is, on the contrary, moving towards actions which could lead to further sanctions. So what really is going on in Kim Jong-un's mind is difficult to decipher. But going by, the state of the country, what do you think is the best way? Because sanctions have not worked for North Korea, and dialogue is something that they particularly are not interested.
You're quite right, actually, in saying that most of the options which we international community has exercised so far, I think they haven't worked. The results have been far from satisfactory. That's a very interesting and very important observation. And we need to think about, you can say, all the options are imperfect, but out of all those imperfect options, which could be possibly the least bad option kind of thing. And in that case, I would say that, look, isolating North Korea, putting more sanction on North Korea is not going to be productive, because we have reached up to a point where more isolation of North Korea is simply not possible. Putting more sanctions, isolating North Korea, I have been repeating it for many times. I'm saying that, look, perfect isolation, 100% isolation of North Korea is simply impossible. They are probably at maximum possible they have got isolated, because hardly they are having less than 10 billion US dollar external trade. Now you can't isolate a country which is already isolated, and it's not going to be productive. And anyway, out of 8 billion or 9 billion trade which they have, I think most of 84%, 85% they are having with China. So that is not going to work. Secondly, it's not a democratic system. If suppose you are putting more pressure, more sanction on North Korea, they are having food shortage and other problems. Actually, common people are going to suffer, but the regime is going to be as good as they are. So I think these options are not, and I think last point, I think Hers was mentioning that is very important. You know, they want to reach, especially in nuclear and missile technology, to a point where it becomes almost irreversible to think about, like say, North Korea is going to give up its nuclear and missile program. So I think the national community, they need to hurry up. They need to put their options together, coordinate their, you can say, measures, especially US, South Korea and Japan. And they need to engage North Korea, because that may not be the perfect option, but probably this is the least bad option.
Actually, I mean, each time this happens, we're seeing there is condemnation. The Japanese Prime Minister will condemn it, call it, an outrageous act. There will be the United States which will also condemn it. And all these three countries, Professor Pant, will agree to do something and, counterattack. But each time, the question is, what really can they do when it comes to containing North Korea? So clearly sanctions have not worked. Any kind of international pressure has not worked. They've been violating international norms, every now and then. And dialogue is something that the former US president did try to initiate. Perhaps it didn't work. Do you think the current US administration, the current US president would be keen on doing what his predecessor had done in terms of engaging in dialogue with Kim Jong-un?
Tina, I think there is a fatigue in the West, in particular in Washington, with regard to North Korea. I think if you look at the statements, they say, oh, these are very provocative and we are open to negotiations. But beyond that, no one wants to go, because I think the kind of diplomatic investment that was made earlier, it was found to be unproductive. Now what has happened is that we have moved into a phase of global politics where fault lines between different so-called blocs are sharpening. So if you say that, look, the West should, or if there is a group community of strategists in Washington who may want to reach out to Kim Jong-un, the counter argument would be that, what can we do? Because you already see greater degree of cooperation with Russians and the Chinese that is happening in terms of North Korea. What was striking was also this report that actually North Koreans were supplying artillery to Russians. The situation is so bad, at least from what we hear in Russia, that the relationship between Russia and North Korea is growing, and the relationship between China and North Korea already used to exist. So at a time when you have Russia, China on one hand and West on the other, not coming to terms on anything globally, it would be very difficult for this chimerical international community to do anything. Because when you say international community, at the end of the day, for peace and security, you want UNSC members to be on the same page. Yes. And at the moment, the P5 are not on the same page, and they're unlikely to be on the same page on this issue. So I agree that we don't have very many good options vis-a-vis North Korea. But I think what is happening is that at the moment, perhaps there is no appetite also to deal with this issue. So and we also have enough evidence that those regimes, those countries that want to pursue nuclear and missile weaponization to a point of no return, who feel that either their regime security or national security is contingent on nuclear weaponization, there are extreme limits to what the international community can do about it. So I think gradually we are seeing weaponization of North Korea, perhaps not for national security as such, but for regime security, as Ambassador Puri mentioned, that it is ultimately about Kim Jong-un's survival. And he feels that at a time when there are enough disruptive forces in the world, he is perhaps one of the lesser disruptive forces. So why not go ahead and say that, look, I'm here, I will try to engage with you, but on my own terms. And so I think the weaponization process is very difficult to, I think what used to be said in the Indian context, capping and rolling back is going to be very difficult with North Korea, because they link it very, very categorically with regime security. And for them, therefore, the question is engagement on what terms and engagement for what. And I think we don't have a clear answer on that, especially when they seem to be having very strong backing from Chinese and the Russians, who may not do very much about North Koreans, but they want to ensure that North Korea exists as a problem state for the West, and for perhaps East Asian allies of the US like South Korea and Japan.
Certainly. You've answered that question, which has intrigued me, and this was supposed to be my next question to the ambassador, that the fact that with allies like China and Russia, why would North Korea, and looking at the fact that it's an impoverished country, why would it focus all its energy on weaponizing and, upping its nuclear capabilities? So, Professor, you've rightly answered that more than national security, it's about the regime security. Ambassador, now coming to the security implications for the neighbors, and particularly Japan. Even though, it may be an attention-seeking exercise, what Kim Jong-un is doing is for, ensuring his regime continues. The fact that it has larger security implications for the region, it is disturbing peace in East Asia, it is having larger implications on global security.
Tina, there's absolutely no doubt about it. While Harsh and earlier I had hinted to you on these possibilities, and which, can't be discounted. And the fact that Kim Jong-un is now perhaps lesser of the various evils that the world is facing. I mean, look where we have come to even in this panel discussion. See, there is no doubt that Japan and South Korea are the two most worried countries. But, the reason for the worriedness is obvious, isn't it? They are aligned to a particular power structure, the United States being the fulcrum, or rather the security provider in that region. North Korea, with great deal of capabilities, is on the other side. And so North Korea is, I don't want to say the kind of Ukraine in the moment is the other way around. But, frankly speaking, they are the guys who test these chaps. And they test them. Why? Because, in various senses, they are the easier meat to test. And the test really goes to the other side. I fully understand and empathize with Japanese concerns. And the same concerns are there with the South Koreans, and the reasons are quite simple and straightforward. Forget their weaponization. God forbid something goes wrong with any of these tests. And these are ballistic missile tests being conducted for the first time. For all North Korea's great technology and abilities, you never know. One little thing goes here and there, what will happen? Look at the kind of devastation, etc. And so, therefore, the Japanese as well as the South Koreans have every reason to be extremely alarmed at this kind of stuff. This is perhaps a game at the other end, but something of an extremely dangerous nature as far as the Japanese, who themselves know what it means to, have nuclear bombs falling on their territory, for them and for the Koreans. And so, therefore, an extremely dangerous set of moves. But, frankly, as Harsh put it, what really can the world do? There are great limits, and if the other ones are willing to take extreme poverty and so on and so forth, be at barely minimalistic survival levels, frankly, this is what technology also leads you to.
Certainly. Professor Mishra, so has the world somewhere undermined North Korea's capabilities in terms of building up its nuclear arsenal, in terms of weaponizing?
I fully agree that they have definitely actually undermined, and I would like to say two important examples I would like to give. One is that, look, I think this is not the first time when actually North Korean missile has crossed Japan. It happened first in 1998, and Japan was very much alarmed. Then they had engagement. They had actually the Perry process started, and from 1998 to 2005. North Korea did not test any missiles. Not only that, in 2017, when new government came to South Korea, engagement process started. Actually, this is happening after a very long time. Actually, the previous time when a North Korean missile crossing Japan, it happened in September 2017. So I think from then till 2022 October, it hasn't happened. So I'm saying that, look, engagement works. The only problem is that engagement and containment, actually quite often, quite frequently, they have been oscillating between 1 and 2. And benefits of either of them has not been coming up.
So in the current scenario, who does Kim Jong-un want to engage with? Is it Japan? Is it South Korea? Is it only the United States?
I doubt that now. Actually, initially that would have been possible, but increasingly it has become more and more sophisticated, the nuclear missile technologies. And I think now they are going to negotiate or have some kind of understanding with the condition that they would like to possess nuclear weapons and nuclear technologies. So it would be increasingly difficult, and that we need to, because we have missed the bus. That's my assessment.
Professor Pant, so looking at the security implications for Japan, which one is the bigger threat, North Korea or China?
Well, I think they are they come as a package deal in some ways, but certainly, whichever way you look at it, Japan's security environment is worsening, and therefore you see a lot of acceptance of the logic of securitized Japan today. Some of the debates that Japan is having today would have been incomprehensible a few years back. Japan was extremely divided on issues like, for example, when Shinzo Abe had come and he was talking of revision of the constitution, making Japan more militarized, making more Japan, putting Japanese forces out there for international peace and conflict. There was a lot of opposition to him. There is still opposition, but the kind of the way Abe and his successors have been able to mold Japanese security policy is partly because of what is happening around Japan, and I think this constant sense of distress, this constant sense of alarm. Obviously, China is a bigger deal. China is a bigger problem, but you have North Korea on your borders that is unpredictable, that is underdeveloped. And when you have this combination of underdeveloped technology, which is being used repeatedly, and where a regime lacks complete transparency, even less than what we see in the case of Beijing, there are questions which I think any neighbor would be. I mean, we are worried with Pakistan. Think if Pakistan were a kind of a regime that North Koreans have, at least we know every day and day in and day out what is happening in Pakistan on our television screens. But what is happening within North Korea, no one has any comprehension. So the challenge, therefore, is how do you manage your everyday diplomacy and your security policy under this shadow of constant threat? And that's why we are seeing a revision in Japanese attitudes. And my sense is that we are going to see a rapid change in Japanese perception and policies, and which we are already seeing that there will be an acceleration of these trends. And very likely we are going to see a very, very securitized East Asia, the path that we are witnessing, partly because of what is happening in East Asia, partly because of what is happening within these countries, the kind of debates that we are witnessing within Japan, within South Korea, and to a certain extent, the North Korean actions.
Right. But Ambassador, the fact that dialogue is the only pathway to peace, and India has been a proponent of peace, looking at our independent foreign policy, there have been several world leaders who at the just concluded UNGA expected India to play a major role in, stopping the Russia-Ukraine war because of the kind of relations we have both with Russia and Ukraine. What kind of relations do we have with North Korea, and can India play any role in facilitating a dialogue between these warring parties and perhaps establish some kind of peace in East Asia, which of course is going to impact global peace as well?
We have an embassy in North Korea. So let me say that's one little point, vastly different from many of the others. We've had it for quite some time. But what else is there? And, frankly, even if I sound contrarian, the need for dialogue on that, somebody like me coming from a diplomatic background can never say no. It's very important and it should be done. But, who can facilitate, who can do what, etc. Remember what Professor Harsh Pant mentioned, that North Korea is what it is, partly because of the way it is, its regime, but also partly because two of the biggest hands in the world stand behind it. And you know what our situation with one of those powers at least is. You really think that it's worth getting into this particular game? And remember, there are any number of other instances of North Korea having supplied its missile technology to Pakistan and so on and so forth. So there is a whole lot of history behind all of this. This is a matter of extreme concern to us, because if East Asia gets securitized or militarized, as things are likely to happen, given the changing circumstances that the Japanese are facing for themselves, it becomes a matter of great concern as far as India is concerned. And don't forget, we certainly do have contested borders on two fronts. So, ours is a difficult situation. I believe that, these are times when the globe and global institutions should try and play some kind of a role. Now, I know that the UN, the Secretary General, etc., are kind of generally in the conversations today around Russia, Ukraine, receiving less than laudatory reference. But my view is that this is the time for several of these kind of institutional arrangements to come forward and try and see that, look, there needs to be some kind of dialogue. Who the dialogue has to be, certainly the North Koreans would like to do exactly what they did earlier with the President of the United States of America. Now, Harsh didn't say it, but certainly most people in Washington who are good practitioners of diplomacy would never have advised it, but for a one-time president who got elected at that time. So these are the nature of things. It's a very complex situation, but it's a complex situation which has now existed over 5 decades. So a very complicated, difficult task. And we happen to find ourselves at the periphery of all of this. So dangerous, but the world institutions, I believe, need to try and do whatever they can do, however limited.
Absolutely. And the fact that this is impacting not just Japan and its neighbors, but it's having global implications. And as all three of our panelists have said, India, of course, will be impacted, with Japan being a key ally of our country. So that having been said, I'll have to wind up the program. Time is running out. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Perspective, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. Absolute pleasure to have you on the program today with us. So viewers, thank you for your time as well. That's it from us on this edition of Perspective. I'll see you same time tomorrow now with another topic. Until then, take good care of yourselves and keep watching Sansad TV.